They want to create foods that you will get up from this table and go drive in your car and go buy and consume, because that's what dopamine does. Dopamine is your motivation hormone. And when it comes to food, it will motivate you to move mountains just to get that food.
I want to talk about fasting with you because you're an expert in all things fasting. You're a medical doctor. And you bring, I think, a really powerful and important voice to this conversation. You know, there's a lot of talk about intermittent fasting, time-restricted eating these days. But a lot of the times we talk, well, the messaging comes from dudes, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of the research is done in dudes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important to bring a female voice to the table. So what is it about being a woman that makes fasting different? How is fasting different for women?
Well, women have this thing called an infradian rhythm. Like we have three rhythms, right? We have an ultradian rhythm, which is like our heartbeat. That's like a short. We have a circadian rhythm, which, you know, I love to talk about. I know you do too. A 24-hour day and night cycle that our body literally runs on. And then women and men, but really the women's cycle is the best known infradian rhythm. And when we are going through these hormonal changes, there can be times of the month where you are not going to tolerate stressors. And, you know, fasting is a stressor, just like exercise is a stressor. So there are times of the month for many women where they're not going to be able to fast for as long as their male counterpart, or even as long as they can at other times of their cycle. So that's a part I think people don't understand, that it's not really the period time. So women get, you know, most women on a 28-day cycle, then they get a period at the very end. And a lot of experts will say, oh, don't fast when you're on your period. You're losing a lot of blood or whatever. But it's actually the week before. It's called the late luteal phase, where you lose your hormones. Your hormones kind of tank and let that lining out, and you're very, very low on your mood. You know, you see all these memes of women saying that they feel like crap, they're crying. And then
is that PMS?
It's PMS.
Okay.
And then they also have cravings, and their blood sugar can fluctuate a lot. And then they'll be very less stress resilient. And so that's what intermittent fasting is, right? It's a super small stress on our body to get big results. And so if you can't stress out, you know, you're already stressed at work, you have a lot of stressful things going on in your life, the exercise and the fasting is just going to exacerbate it, and it's going to be very difficult for you, and you may get negative side effects from it.
Wow. So men don't have this problem. Men can fast 30 days a month if they want to.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably not going to be the healthiest thing to do, but they could essentially, any of those days they could fast and throw exercise into the mix and it'll be fine. But for women, that's not the case.
Well, I think for anyone, when you're doing a hormetic stressor, so anything that is stressing your body out in order to get beneficial effects, like exercise, for example, you can overdo it. Male, female, right? You can have so much stress in your life, plus the stress of exercise, plus the stress of sleep loss, plus the stress of intermittent fasting. It's sometimes too much for anyone. But for women, there seems to be a special time of the month that it's exacerbated.
Wow.
And that late luteal phase, like athletes know this, that's probably the time that they're not performing at their peak. They're feeling more fatigued, and your mood, your serotonin is literally low during that time. And that's what makes you crave carbs, right? Because it's an easy way to like replete that serotonin. And so that's the time. And that's just a very simple way to think about it. And the rest, when your estrogen is rising in the very beginning of your cycle, that's actually a great time to fast. And then when you have that testosterone burst around ovulation, that's actually a great time to fast and to build muscle. But then when your hormones kind of tank, that's the best time to do more self-care activities, like what we talk, nature time, more sleep, more, you could even adjust your schedule, your life, so that the stressful period, the big decisions don't happen during that time where your hormones are really low and affecting your mood and your decision-making skills.
Wow. And it's called the post-luteal phase?
It's a late
Luteal
Luteal phase.
phase.
So you have a follicular phase and a luteal phase. The follicular phase is day 1 of your period to day 14, which is ovulation. And then you have your luteal phase, which starts at day 15 and ends at the day of your period. And so the late luteal phase, which in the lay media would be called PMS, the time, the premenstrual week, is the week that you'd want to really, just in general, but with intermittent fasting, lower the hours or just stop altogether. So, and I think once you understand that, you realize, oh, that's why so many women will say, oh, now I understand why some days I'm able to do, 16 hours and other days I struggle with even 12. And it's not only the stress response, it's also the blood sugar variation, and I know after you've had a big cheat day and you wake up in the morning and you feel like crap, you want to eat again. And that's what blood sugar fluctuations can do to you during that week as well.
Wow. So all of these different stressors, whether it's exercise, fasting, emotional stress, work stress, they have this compounding effect.
Yeah. And women seem to be wired for stress a little bit. I mean, it's not a sexist thing to say. They've seen studies where women will have higher stress hormones to a similar event.
Wow.
And so it may be a mechanism to protect the unborn fetus that, you may or may want or have. It's a way to protect your hormonal system from creating a life during a time of stress or famine or war. And so we have a very, very finely tuned stress response. And it makes, it's kind of a pain nowadays, but we think that it would make sense that it was an evolutionary thing to help the population. You don't want to be procreating and having lots of kids during a time of war or famine. So when your body is really sensing a lot of stress, it is not going to want to ovulate. And that's the cause of lots of infertility in our world, is like high stress
Wow.
environments.
And
So,
not only does modern stress tend not to be life threatening,
yeah.
but oftentimes it's self-imposed.
100%. And, when we are subject to media all the time, um, or just news that we deem to be stressful, like stress is in our own heads, right? You can have the worst stressful life and not be stressed, or you could have very minor things that set you off all the time. And that's part of the work we all do, right? To kind of make it so that our stress response isn't wreaking havoc in our hormones all the time and that we can kind of ride that wave.
Yeah. You mentioned that the media refers to like the PMS. That is that sort of an antiquated phrase at this point?
It's a colloquial phrase, meaning that it's a non-medical way of thinking about it.
Oh, interesting.
And people get it wrong all the time because, in the fasting world, they're always calling the period time the time you shouldn't fast. It's actually you actually feel, women will know this, that they actually feel kind of back to normal a few days into their period hormonally and mentally. It's really that week before. And technically, it's called that late luteal phase.
Hmm. So aside from the late luteal phase, is fasting something that you think that women should engage with?
I think everyone should be intermittent fast. We are not meant to be eating 16 hours a day like most of us do. Our gut bacteria, just like us, they need rest too. And they actually need to sleep. They need, their sleep. So I think it's important to understand that it's not a fad, it's not a trend, it's not a diet. It's literally how we're built to live. And I think all of us, I know you probably know this. I know this. When I eat late at night, you just feel kind of like almost like jet lagged or hungover in the morning because you basically woke your gut bacteria, your digestive system up, and you're asking them to do things that they're supposed to be doing during the day.
Yeah, it's true. It's actually really cute to think about bacteria like.
Yeah, they have personalities, they have food preferences. They also create serotonin and dopamine, and so they tell us if we're happy or sad, which I think is like weird. And also, if we're craving something, it might not be coming from our brain. It might be coming from those guys or gals,
Yeah,
whatever,
yeah.
that live down there.
We don't
So
know their pronouns, but
yeah, I think they're like neutral.
yeah. So cute. Is it true that gut bacteria can actually influence our cravings for certain foods?
Yeah, absolutely. So, gut bacteria can influence your motivation to go get food companies love this, right? They want to create foods that you will get up from this table and go drive in your car and go buy and consume because that's what dopamine does. Dopamine is your motivation hormone. And when it comes to food, it will motivate you to move mountains just to get that food. And the gut bacteria can create dopamine
Hmm.
and it will actually send signals to your brain that you need to go get more of that food, even if you're consciously not even aware of it.
Wow. My good friend Sarah Ann Stewart, she has this hypothesis that when you have a significant other,
Mhm,
you you know, whether it's making out, sharing food, having
mhm.
sex, you cross pollinate each other's
Yeah.
microbiomes, and then when you split, the bacteria that you've received from them causes you to crave that person.
Oh, so
Is there
interesting.
any science to that, or is that just some
That's
wacko
really
stuff?
that's very I mean, the first part of it, I was all in on,
Yeah, that makes sense.
that
But
does make sense.
she brought that up when I was going through a breakup,
Oh,
and she was
so
like, "Well,
sad.
your bacteria want this person. That's why you're having these like cravings. It's not because you actually are in love with that person. All
Interesting.
signs on paper point to this person not being the right person for you, but it's your bacteria."
Hmm. Well, maybe she's onto something, but I don't know of that. I know that bacteria when you live with a person or even if you share space with a person or share food with a person, you are going to be sharing gut bacteria and that's a great thing. There was a study that showed that moms who lick their baby's pacifier, their babies have stronger microbiomes,
Well,
and it's literally just transfer of saliva. And when you look at what's happened over the last 2 years with the pandemic and we're being separated, we're not getting the good gut bacteria. So remember how they say you're the product of the people you spend the most time with? It's literally that bacteria that you're transferring. It's like dictates how you think, how you eat, how obese you are, all of that. They think that that's partially or maybe the entire explanation for that.
wow, fascinating. Okay, so we've talked about giving your gut bacteria a rest. We've talked about this feeling of sort of having a food hangover when we
Mhm.
eat out of sync with our circadian needs. But what else? What else do women and men stand to gain from intermittent fasting?
That emotional insulin roller coaster that I was telling you about, the one where you wake up after you've had a late night. And I mean, I don't really do this very often anymore, but once in a while when I've stayed up super late or eaten or drank more than I want to, the next morning, you kind of feel like eating again. And you kind of don't eat, even though you just ate. It's like this um, insulin roller coaster
Hmm.
that happens, and we all live. Most of us that are eating a processed food, high sugar diet are dependent on that blood sugar spike for energy, and
Wow.
it almost feels like you're losing energy or low. You know, people get hangry, and that's really that low blood sugar. And what you can gain, men and women, is that if you start to extend the periods of food, you have to train your body not to have that huge dip that will motivate you to get food. So you'll have to learn. I learned the hard way that, oh, you can't eat a lot of sugar and then think that you can fast. You won't be able to. That's why so many people struggle with it so much because they're feeling like they're dying
Hmm.
when their blood sugar is low. And so you have to learn to eat healthy, non refined sugar foods so that you can go for longer periods of time without food. And that's one of the biggest benefits of intermittent fasting.
Wow, I love that. Yeah, I mean, because people are just like they're eating chronically throughout the day.
They can't, and they'll feel like lightheaded or hangry if they don't eat every few hours. And you'll hear people saying that all the time. And that's because their insulin's totally dysregulated and they're really having that response because of that.
It is interesting that increased meal frequency is associated with higher BMI.
Yeah.
It's a correlation. It's not causal,
Mhm.
but that people who eat more frequently throughout the day tend to be at higher risk for obesity.
Yeah. And people who eat late in the day also tend to be at a higher risk for obesity. I mean, our ability to process sugar goes way down after 8 p.m. And so when you're eating the largest meal of your day, for some people, very late into the evening, maybe it's even 10, 11, midnight for a lot of people, especially during the pandemic, you are challenging your GI tract, your metabolism to wake up from the middle of the night. It's like I woke you up in the middle of the night and asked you a complicated math problem. You would either get it wrong or you might get it right, but you'd be pissed. The next day you're tired. So that's what we're doing on a daily basis.
Wow. Yeah, I find that when I eat late at night, the next day my digestion is off,
Yeah,
my hunger patterns feel dysregulated.
100%. It's like a it's like a roller coaster
Mm,
that you're on, and now you have to figure out how to get off again, and that's the problem. I don't know if you do cheat days, but recently I've been, like, experimenting with what, people would call a cheat day, would call it a free day,
mm.
and that's the problem with it because then you're on this roller coaster and you have to figure out how to get off again, and, like, a lot of people can't, and that's why it's really dangerous to do that.
So when should people be having their dinners ideally?
2 to 3 hours before bed. So that could mean, it does it is really difficult for like night shift workers. I get questions about that all the time because there's lots of nurses and of course we live in a 24/7 society. And the problem is that you're even if you're staying up all night, your body is still sleeping at
Mm.
night. Your gut bacteria, so to say that you can't ever really flip that. And so the advice if you're, someone who actually can't eat at reasonable hours, you really have to think about how you could do it so that you could. Maybe you eat the biggest meal in the morning after your shift or before your shift and don't eat as much during your shift, which is, if you've ever seen nurses, they like have like a full buffet. Like, I mean, there's overnight shifts in the hospital are is like a eating bonanza, because it's people have all the food out, so it's a really hard, culture shift for people like that, but that's how you would wanna do it. So for most people, it would be 2 to 3 hours before bed.
Now, can women in this late luteal phase, I mean, should they not should they be eating up until the point at which they go to bed, or is that something that even for them is a reasonable?
I think, even not fasting would be like 12-hour fast, which seems so stupid, but it's 12-hour fast is still a nice break for your body. So during the late luteal phase, I tell people, I advise people that if they're having trouble to go just to 12 hours or, even less, 11 hours, whatever fits their body, and then go up from there. And same thing with if you're someone who just came off a high sugar diet or you're having issues with insulin dysregulation, then you want to start at 12 hours also.
Yeah, but I mean, 12 hours, it's like
I
so
know.
easy. It's like,
I know.
I mean, for me at least,
Well, it's also like a
8 a.m. to
muscle.
8 p.m.
Yeah, but that's also it's a muscle, right? Fasting is a muscle. Like the first time you fasted, you probably thought 12 hours was hard. So you metabolism is a muscle. So just like we work out our muscles, we have to work out that metabolism muscle.
And intermittent fasting is a sort of way to do that.
Yeah, most people never turn on that metabolic switch. So for people who don't know, you're supposed to be able to switch from using glucose as fuel to using fat for fuel. And most of us in the United States never, ever need to switch to fat for fuel because there's so much glucose and glycogen lying around that never in your life have you gotten to the point where you've run out of that. And it's like a muscle that becomes really weak. You're not going to be metabolically flexible, is like, how you think about it. So intermittent fasting is a small little way to try to get your that muscle a little bit stronger. So even if you do a 12-hour fast and then you work up to say 14-hour fast, right? Really reasonable. You stop eating at 8 a.m. and then you're going to do your workout before you eat again at 10 a.m. That's kind of what I do. Um, then you do a fasted workout before and you use up that whatever glycogen is left. and then you've started to use fatty acids. So it's like a great way to kind of turn on that metabolic switch.
Yeah, it's like glycogen. How would you describe glycogen? It's like it's a sugar that we store.
Store in our liver. Yeah.
Hmm.
So you use up the blood sugar that's, from just what you ate. And then the glycogen is like the pasta dinner from like a day ago.
Hmm.
And then once you use that up, that's when you switch to fatty acid.
Wow. And how much glycogen can we store? Like how much are we storing typically?
So most people until probably 16 to 24 hours worth. So if you are someone who eats a pretty high sugar diet or high, refined carbohydrate, a 12-hour fast is not going to get you into that metabolic switch zone. But if you're someone who eats a pretty low sugar diet, it could be as easy as a 14-hour fast and then doing a workout, and you're already in there. So it just depends on how much sugar you have lying around in your bloodstream to depend on when that switch turns on. And unfortunately, we don't have a way of knowing like, oh, Max's switch has turned on. We just kind of know, oh, well, he doesn't eat a lot of sugar. He did a 16-hour fast and then he worked out. I think he's probably, you kind of can guesstimate. Ketones may give you a small indication, but it's not accurate.
Well, isn't there like the respiratory exchange ratio?
You
Like from a
can, yeah,
metabolic cart, if you
yeah,
really want to see
yeah,
if you're,
if you wanted to.
yeah.
There's ways, but there's no like standard thing that you can give to people to say like, hey, do it until you get to that metabolic switch and then you're good. You can't really know. You will start to notice that you can go a little bit longer, and that's your body getting used to using fatty acids for fuel.
Wow. I love this idea of giving your metabolism a workout.
Yeah.
Is there any other, like, what are some other ways to do that? I mean, that's a fascinating concept.
I mean, exercise,
Hmm.
right? Because you have to literally, your cells will be throwing more glucose into your bloodstream to help you, um, run faster or lift more. And so you're able to get rid of some of that glycogen, that extra stored glucose. It's a great way to work on your metabolism. There's so many different things that we could be doing to improve our metabolism, but fasting is one of the best ways. Fasting and exercise are, heat stress, cold stress are another good way to work on that.
Oh, I love that.
Um,
Both of those.
I think are you a fan of cold stress? Yeah.
Super big fan. Yeah.
Okay. Ice baths or what?
I love it. I mean, even for me, there's a barrier to entry. Like you got
Yeah.
to mentally psych yourself
Oh
up.
my God.
But doing an ice bath to me is like, it's like, I've never regretted doing it.
Yeah.
You have to psych yourself up, but it's the same thing like going to a gym. Some days you just don't feel like going to the gym, but nobody's ever regretted a
Yeah.
workout, right? Just because it floods your brain with this cocktail of neurochemicals that make you feel good.
Totally.
I
Totally.
get the same thing from a cold
But you
plunge.
do that every day.
I wouldn't say every day. I
Okay.
do it maybe like 3-4 times
I
a
feel
week.
like it's definitely like that. It's like PTSD from growing up in like I went to college in Ithaca and then I did my training in Boston. I mean, it was like frigid and I was depressed like half the year, so it's like bringing back cold is just like really hard, but it is also a great way to train your metabolism to kind of get a shock. And then, the hormesis, all these things that cause a hormonal stress are a metabolic exercise
And
for you.
cold in particular, so it encourages the proliferation of brown fat.
Exactly. Well, then now they think that sauna or heat stress does the same thing.
It does the same thing.
Yeah.
Why would that be the case? Because brown fat, the way that I think about it, it's sort of like it functions as an internal heating pad.
Yeah. But I think that there's heat shock proteins that have effects on the fat all over your body. So they're seeing really great data for heat stress as well, even with that same mechanism or
Wow.
similar. Yeah.
It is
Crazy.
interesting that there's like this conservation
Yeah.
of effects
Yeah.
that you see across these different hormetic
Yeah.
stressors.
It's crazy how, and eating every hormetic stressors is exactly what you want for your brain too. It's like small stressors or small challenges um, for your metabolism is really great. So I think that's the way I think about it because you want to challenge your brain the same way that you want to challenge your metabolism.
So true. I love this. So, okay. How do we know then? Because I think we're encouraging people listening to this if it's safe to do so, to engage with these different modalities, whether it's fasting,
Mhm.
cold stress, heat stress. How do you know when you've had like too much stress?
Great question. Stress is a there's many different ways people will not know that they're stressed except that they feel like crap, they feel exhausted. So energy levels are one of the best ways. Sleep disturbances, you'll see, I know for me, when I'm in a very stressful place in my life, my sleep is just completely off.
Mm.
There's a small cortisol spike that you get in the middle of the night between 2 and 5 a.m. And if you're really stressed, often you'll wake up. And so many people can relate to that. They wake up in the middle of the night, they don't know why. They're like almost wide awake. It's that little bit of cortisol that you get is enough to wake you up because your cortisol levels are pretty high.
Wow.
So, appetite dysregulation, like you were saying, cravings um, is a great indicator that your stress levels might be off. It's also an indicator that your gut microbiome might be off, which also goes with stress. And so, so sleep, energy, cravings, mood, and basically function the way you're able to do like complex tasks is a great way.
Wow.
So if you think about it, okay, this is so sad, but this pandemic, for example, big stressors in the world, war, famine, like, pandemics, they shrink your hippocampus and they can wire you more to feel stress and less wired to feel pleasure or like relaxation because your body goes into kind of like a danger conservation mode. So it wants to be able to sense like, oh, I got to, move out of the way or I have to run now. And so it makes you very hardwired to see the stressors in your life and less hardwired to kind of see the pleasures or the happy, relaxing things. And so there's real evidence that your brain may have changed during the last year. And people feel this all the time. They'll feel like they're more moody these days. They might not be as happy. We know that anxiety prescriptions have gone up 30%, antidepressants, 20 something percent. Americans are the unhappiest they've been in 50 years.
Wow.
So we know stress really has a huge effect on that brain area, the hippocampus, too.
Wow. So chronic stress, it creates like this self-perpetuating
Yeah.
prophecy where it
Yeah.
makes you persistently hypervigilant.
Yeah. Hypervigilant. Like that's a great way to put it when if you've seen people that come from a war-torn country or a time of even interpersonal stress, they will describe their mood as like a hypervigilant. You're really sensitive to stressors and it's hard to relax.
Wow. I do see that sometimes in people. Like
Yeah.
they're hypervigilant and it's just like chill
Yeah.
person,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it's
And it's hard to chill when you've been in a place or in a time of, and, I can say this and I'll tell you that probably 2, 3, 5 years from now, we'll really see the ramifications of it because we're just starting to see the problems that this has all caused, but it's really
well,
going
it's
to show.
trauma.
It's trauma.
And not to minimize trauma,
Yeah.
trauma.
Yeah. But
Um
it's a type of trauma.
yeah.
Yeah.
Fascinating. And the irony that chronic stress also negatively affects your immune function, makes you
Yeah.
vulnerable to infection.
Absolutely. Chronic stress is one of the biggest. So, when I was in immunology fellowship at Columbia, we used to get calls for low immune system all the time. And what we would explain to them is if you're in the hospital at Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center, you probably have a really bad illness and your immune system will be super suppressed during that time. And it's almost like you are, that's not a disorder. That's your response to a stress in your body. Like you're trying to heal something. It's really weird because you would think that your immune system would be hyperactive, and it is in some ways, but in other ways, it becomes really suppressed. And that happens during times of chronic stress and during this, pandemic too.
Wow. So be mindful of your stress.
Yeah. I mean, that's like an understatement, right?
Yeah.
So,
Super important. What about breaking the fast? First meal of the day. When should that be done? What should they do that with?
okay. So food order matters. I think there's been enough good studies to show that you don't want to break it with a cupcake. Um, you there's a study that shows that if you break your fast, it makes a difference whether you break your fast with fiber and protein and fat first, and then put the carbohydrates, especially refined, later. That's the best order of events. And so when I used to fast by mistake when I was in training, and then I would like dive into a pizza or some kind of sweet big load, and it takes about 20 minutes for you to even register. And so you end up spiking your blood sugar through the roof. And really, these blood sugar spikes are what's responsible for inflammation, diabetes, heart disease, all of these things. So you really want to be mindful of when you break your fast to kind of go with um, protein, fiber, and fat forward.
I literally can't. I refuse to break my fast with anything other than. I'd rather not eat than break my fast with something other than protein. Uh,
Interesting. But that's not most people. That's rare.
right. They break their fast with a muffin,
Yeah.
glass of orange juice.
Yeah. Or, I've in cereal.
Yeah.
Yeah, bagels. It's literally every breakfast food you can think of is horrible to eat first. And the crazy thing is, um, it's not just the order. So you definitely want to do the fiber and the protein and the fat before the carbohydrates. But you also want to make sure it's like whole foods, because not whole foods like the store, but whole foods like unrefined foods, because you really don't want that blood sugar to be spiking up right when you eat that food. So meaning that a piece of bread has been vilified, right? But if you have a piece of Ezekiel or sprouted bread, that's going to be okay in terms of your blood sugar balance. So it's about also taking in non processed, unrefined foods. The example I love to give is that study where they hospitalized patients. They literally put people in the hospital and they could only eat what was delivered to you, and there was two groups and they were getting the same number of calories, but one was getting processed version and the other one was getting a homemade version. So it would be like muffins in a plastic thing. Everything was packaged, same number of calories, and they saw that the processed group asked for 500 calories more of snacks a day.
Mm.
And literally they were monitoring them and it was nothing different, the same calories, but it's like your whole gut brain connection, your cravings, your hormones are so altered by these foods that we can't even understand exactly. It's not just about the sugar, there's something else too.
Yeah. There was another study that I'm sure you're familiar with, but it basically they took this group of people and I believe it was a crossover trial where they used two different kinds of porridges. And the porridges it was a wheat based porridge
Mhm.
controlled for carbohydrate content and calorie content. So it was the same amount of carbs, same amount of calories. The only difference was that one of the porridges was very finely ground
Mm.
and the other porridge was a more coarse
Yeah.
grind. And what they found was that the more finely ground porridge led to a blood sugar spike that was way higher. It led to a way higher secretion of insulin, and it also sent because they were wearing, I believe they were wearing, well, they probably weren't wearing CGMs, but their blood sugar was being tested. The finely ground porridge sent their blood sugar way below baseline, and
Yeah,
it
and
was
that's
the
why.
and the coarsely one ground one returned their blood sugar to baseline, just like a really nice, like it was a really nice gentle broad curve.
That's the thing I think, smart entrepreneurs that listen to your podcast should think to themselves like, wow, there's this whole world. We've been doing it all wrong. We've been providing people with highly refined foods so that um, they buy more of that. But now there's this whole world of healthy people who actually want to rebuild their gut microbiome, and they still want tasty foods, but they want ones that are whole foods or like highly with high fiber content. Um, and we can actually shift things in a way that I think people don't even realize. But I mean, I would buy so many more products if they were available. Like we now know that um, there's a new study that came out that said that actually fermented food is actually better than just fiber. So
Hmm.
now I'm like on the hunt all the time for finding more fermented foods because there's only so much kombucha and sauerkraut you can have, right? And like kimchi. And then so now I'm always
Also, it
looking for,
wrecks your breath, you know?
yeah,
Like it's not like midday you wanna
yeah, like you want
have
to
a
have,
kimchi
yeah,
snack.
exactly. And it's hard for people who say are, um, there's pickles are not necessarily always probiotic and neither is yogurt. So you have to really do some research. So there's a whole world out there. And that study showed that six fermented food servings a day was what differentiated the two groups. And that group had just much more diverse bacteria and also much lower levels of inflammation. And so it's not like you're probably wanting to go to that next level. It's intermittent fasting, it's adding fermented foods up to so one kombucha is 2 servings, so that's not so bad. 6 a day.
Wow. Do the benefits of consuming kombucha, in your opinion, outweigh the whatever risks there are in the amount of sugar that you sometimes get?
I think it's hard to know right now, but you want to pick the one with the lowest amount of sugar. There's now newer options that are pretty low sugar. And then, of course, you can do um, kefir or you can do now there's probiotic cottage cheese, there's probiotics, vegetables. You can get so many things. And like I said, and we'll probably get more because if you're trying to consume 6 servings a day, that's a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. Okay, so some of your favorite probiotic foods, you've talked about pickles. How
Yeah.
do you know when a pickle has probiotics in it?
So in America, they have to list it. So you have to actually look at the back to see if there's bacteria written on there. And that's a great way to know. So that's like, it's literally even smaller than the nutrition facts. So you really have to look, but you'll see that there's a certain like if it's say a probiotic yogurt, you should look on the back and make sure that there's like, there are things that said like L. reuteri or lactobacillus, so you know that there's actually bacteria in there. That's the easiest way to tell because you have to list it on the nutrition facts. And then if you're fermenting at home, you pretty much know that. But I think it's for most people, it's kind of difficult to, know what's fermented unless you're actually looking at the label.
Chocolate is fermented, is it not?
It can be, and Gouda, um, is fermented. It can be, there's so many, like, really good, tasty things, like, I think, uh, a lot of, yogurts, though like, a lot of people love yogurt, but if you look at most commercial sweetened yogurts, they're actually not probiotics. You have to read the labels. I love fermented foods. There's this Japanese, fermented soy. Have you ever had
Natto?
natto? Have you ever
Yeah,
had it?
I have.
It's like the most disgusting looking food, but it has kind of like this earthy taste that you could kind of get used to. And miso, obviously, it's fermented
Yeah.
as well. So there's a lot of different, like in Indian food, there's lots of different fermented options, pickles, and fermented dough that they make things with. So there's definitely good options for fermented food. You just have to look for them.
Natto is literally beans in Astroglide.
Yeah.
That's
No,
how
it's
I would
so
describe.
sticky. Like it's even more I don't it's it tastes I think it tastes you can get used to it. I actually kind of like it, but I think it's a very
Uh,
difficult thing to like.
yeah.
Do
It's
you
a,
like kimchi?
I love kimchi.
Oh, that's awesome.
I
That's a
love
good one.
kimchi. I don't love, I mean, some of it's better than others. I like
Yeah.
the really, there's a brand called Mother-in-Law's Kimchi.
Yeah, yeah,
Really,
yeah.
kimchi, really good. It's like a New York based company.
There's so many at Whole Foods now. You can get a lots of non-fish ones for people who are like either allergic or don't want to consume animal products. There's
Right.
like vegan, vegetarian versions, non-fish versions. So it's pretty cool that there's so many options now.
So, but a food that's fermented, you can have foods that are fermented and have probiotics, but they don't necessarily overlap, right?
You can no, you can pickle a food, and that doesn't mean that it's fermented with bacteria. But if it's fermented and pickled, it's has bacteria. Does
Got
that
it.
make sense? Yeah.
Yes. Okay, cool. So we're talking about foods. Once you finally break your fast and you're eating, so you want to optimize for protein, for fiber, fermented foods. You started eating dairy, which I feel like that was like an announcement that you made on your Instagram.
Well, I think, everybody wants to put people in categories, right? And I think even when you you asked me like, "Are you vegan?" And because in our world, we all live in kind of these categories, and it's too hard to explain to someone like, "Oh, I was a South Asian immigrant. My parents are vegetarian, and then I just didn't tolerate dairy, so it kind of became vegan, kind of." But then when I learned a lot of this probiotic data, I started to realize that a lot of these countries that eat dairy, they're not just drinking like glasses of milk, they're actually having fermented dairy.
Yeah.
And it's actually very healthy, can be very healthy. Now, I understand that there's many ideological, cultural, like religious reasons that you wouldn't want to, or health reasons you wouldn't want to do dairy. But if it was only that you weren't sure how it was going to affect your health, then fermented dairy is a nice way to check. Because I know that when I did an elimination diet, and everybody should do an elimination diet to figure out what their food sensitivities are, and then I found out the gluten and dairy were something that it didn't sit well with my GI tract, and so that's not really an allergy, it's a sensitivity or an intolerance. But then I realized that I could add in small amounts of fermented dairy and still feel great, actually feel better. But I'm still not, I'm not venturing to the glass of milk or to other forms of animal food.
Yeah. I feel, you know what?
Like you.
Funny story. When you were first on the podcast, I didn't know that you were plant
I
based.
know, I know.
And yeah, and and I remember telling you, you asked me like how I broke my fast
Yeah,
that day,
I
and I was
totally
like,
remember that.
I broke my fast with a ribeye,
Yeah,
and
and
but I
I
said it very like proud of myself to you.
yeah,
You must have thought that I was like a lunatic,
disgust I
or
mean, I'm
or
non-judgmental.
or at least not the most sensitive person.
No, as as a person and as a physician, I'm diet agnostic, meaning that you have to I don't really feel like a zealot about anything per se. I definitely don't believe that carnivore is the way to go. I don't know if you do, but
No, I'm not.
that's
I don't.
yeah.
Yeah,
So I don't but there's a wide spectrum of diets that can be really healthy, and there's no reason to be like vilify anything. And that's what I didn't like about the vegan community when I first got into this world of wellness, because I felt like you either were on team vegan or you weren't. There was no like in between. And if you were, then that means that you have to like band together and like hate, not everyone, but a lot of people hate on others and
yeah,
kind of use each other as ways to justify that the vegan diet is like, you know, better morally. And I think that that was a problem. I think, there's evolutionarily, if when you look at blue zones, when you look at gut bacteria, there is no evidence that you need to be just one thing. There's varied diets that, and you can definitely say, I think I heard you say something about like, you can't say for sure that meat, red meat, is inflammatory or causes all these problems. And I think you're right in a way, but we don't have that data yet. We don't have data on people who only eat like, the type of red meat that is completely unprocessed, and they don't also eat burgers and fries and whatever it is. So I think that it's a good point, but I think for the most part, you want to stay away from processed meat. I think I would definitely go as far as saying that, but fermented dairy is great, and fish can be really healthy as long as you're looking at making sure there's no heavy metals and mercury.
yeah.
But it's hard to kind of really generalize more than that.
Yeah. Well, I think the problem is that people they take their diet tribes to the extreme.
Yeah.
I, I want people to know that I firmly plant my flag in the stance that I think that red meat is healthy, but that doesn't mean that I think that factory farmed red meat is healthy. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean that I think that uber fatty cuts of meat are healthy. That doesn't
Yeah.
mean that I think that only eating meat is healthy.
Yeah.
No, I said that red meat is healthy without any other stipulations around it, right?
And I think that it's hard because most people, when you say that though, when you say red meat is healthy, they're like, oh, great, I can have my burger. Like, I can go have my fatty, so it's really hard for people to translate that because they're not eating,
Yeah.
I don't think, like you are.
Right. Yeah. And I eat tons of vegetables and fruit
Yeah.
and, like other things as well.
Do you,
I think I promote the most balanced diet out
do you
there.
not eat anything? Do you eat gluten?
No, I avoid gluten.
Okay.
I avoid gluten, and I certainly avoid refined grain products, and I
Yeah.
minimize. I don't really consume many grains because to me they're essentially empty calories. I don't really, like if a sweet potato I'll eat because the beta carotene I think is good. The potassium is great. It's a nutrient dense food. But to me, like white rice, for example, is sort of the equivalent of empty calories. It doesn't mean that I'm even dogmatic about that,
Yeah. Yeah.
like I'll eat it with my sushi,
Right.
but I'm also active. I work out. We were talking about
Yeah.
the liver and the storage capacity. I'm active all day.
Yeah.
Like, I'm doing things.
I I think that changed my stance on gluten a little bit recently because of, you know, I think gluten gets such a bad rap because of the things that are made with gluten. But if you really just ate a sprouted wheat bread
Yeah.
or, it really isn't that bad. So I feel like I've changed a little bit because I used to be like the easiest thing someone could do was take out sugar, gluten, and dairy. And now I realize like, well, that's nuanced also. I think we say gluten and dairy because we're thinking like ice cream and chips and burgers. But if you did the unrefined version of that, it's actually really healthy, and grains can be really healthy if they're unrefined.
Yeah. It's just that so few people are consuming unrefined grains.
Yeah. That's
Like,
exactly what I'm saying about your red meat argument is
yeah.
that it's like hard to say things because then um people like the reason why keto was so popular is because then you kind of feel like you can have what you love and crave without guilt, right? And that's the same idea of like telling people, oh, well, you can just go eat grains as much as you want because then they're not going to eat the grains that you want them to eat.
Yeah. I think that when diet quality is high, all of these other variables will inevitably end up working themselves out.
Meaning that like if you're eating unrefined whole foods.
Unrefined, minimally processed foods.
Yeah, and I think that's a problem though, most people aren't,
Right.
and it's hard to switch because you're addicted to these and like I said, not just your brain, but your body is addicted to it, and so it's really hard to switch from a very refined diet to a whole foods, and then, there's Wellness World comes out, with all these unhealthy foods that have healthy labels on them.
Yeah.
Have you ever been to
Oh, yeah.
Expo West?
Yeah.
I literally felt like I was gonna die after that because so for people who don't know, it's like this food trade show where all these health foods come and they sample everything. Everything's a sample and they're all healthy things. So you think, oh, well, like, I'll have a piece of this. And it's really junk food, but it has a healthy label. So now we have this world of like, McDonald's, okay, you're not gonna eat that, but then what about all these packaged keto, like, fat bombs and, the other refined keto or not just keto, but vegan, snacks?
Yeah. They have they've been, is it greenwashed? Like they just
Yeah,
like they
I don't
promote
know
this
what the
healthy. Yeah.
yeah, greenwash, yeah, that is the word for it.
Yeah. And but it's a lot of it's BS. I mean, I'm happy that those products exist because I think to indulge is to be human.
Yeah,
And so I'm grateful that there are these like quote unquote better for you products out there now,
yeah,
um, which didn't exist 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
100%. But the better for you sometimes are not actually better for you, they just say, like, I loved protein bars for a long time, and I realized, like, oh, it's actually a this is a Snickers with protein powder in it. Like if I just had a protein shake and a
Yeah.
Snickers, it would be the same thing. And I think that's like that's like the next step, right? Like you realize like, oh, a lot of these foods are just unhealthy foods with protein or something add fiber, whatever added in that you would rather eat the real thing,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, I will say that there is a product that I discovered recently, and I have no financial affiliation with this company, but I'm actually looking to see if they'll come on and sponsor the podcast because I love the product. It's by a company called Evolved. It's like a chocolate
Oh yeah,
manufacturer,
yeah.
and they made a white chocolate. Typical white chocolate
It's
is
like
milk
sugar.
and sugar.
Yeah.
That's
Mhm.
literally all it
Yeah.
is, maybe with some cacao butter. But this product, it's sweetened with monk fruit, cashews, vanilla,
Wow.
Jerusalem artichoke fiber extract. So it's like prebiotic,
Love
right?
it.
That's literally all it's made of. It's a keto and it's delicious.
Wait,
And
what's
and
wow.
and I wouldn't eat typical white
Everyone's
chocolate.
like running out to buy
It's
this
so
thing.
good. I think I mentioned it on my Instagram a couple months ago and they sold out
Oh, wow.
literally from the product, but
If
it's that good.
Max mentions your product,
It's
that's
bomb though. You
that's
don't want to eat
amazing.
too much of it. I feel like if I
Prebiotic fiber is like
it's
not
death.
something. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a
Jerusalem artichoke fiber is like, what is it? Inulin, right?
yeah. Have
Eat too
you
much of that, you're gonna have to quarantine yourself for a different reason.
have you ever had psyllium husk? That's like my new discovery.
Oh,
So
psyllium husk is great.
it's great. You can add it to like baked goods. It ups the fiber content for like so many different things, but you also don't want to go crazy because it's also going to cause GI distress if you have too
Well,
much.
it doesn't get fermented though, right? Like that's
No, it's
my
not
experience. So
fermented.
it doesn't make you like it doesn't make you super gassy the
Oh
way
yeah,
that like
some people it does though.
oh it
It's
does?
yeah, for some people.
Psyllium husk?
Yeah.
Interesting.
But it's a great thing to add. I realize like you can just add it to almost anything, your oatmeal, your, anything that you're eating and it can add up like the fiber content goes way up.
Well, I love what it does for balancing hormones
Yeah.
and lipids like LDL.
Yeah. Psyllium husk is like a superfood.
It is kind of.
Yeah. It's like sounds like it's like a grandpa food, but it's actually really healthy and super easy to find. You can find like unrefined psyllium husk at like your local health food store. And it's something you can add easily to your diet that's going to like up the quality of your diet in general.
So you put in smoothies.
Or oatmeal, or
How much
baked
of it?
goods, just 1 spoon. I mean, okay, let's put it this way. If you're one of those people who are sensitive and you don't know, you just start with half and then you can go to full because like, you're not, but there are people who will be sensitive to it. And so you don't want to go, especially people who come from a low fiber diet background. Their gut bacteria is just not used to that much fiber.
Yeah, I love that. So dairy. So you've been doing what? Kefir, yogurt?
Yeah, kefir and probiotic cottage cheese, which is like sounds. It's definitely a love. Either you love it or you hate it.
I love cottage
cheese.
cheese.
Cottage cheese is like my favorite thing. But
How do you eat it?
so I just eat it plain or with pineapple or with monk fruit. I like love these. What's the brand? I think it's Lakanto makes like monk fruit sweetener that you can just add to like just a touch goes a long way just to cut because a probiotic cottage cheese is a little more tart than what we're used to. And so it just cuts that tartness out a little bit.
I'm wondering if what I buy is the probiotic. Is it like what's
It's
the
Nancy's is the
Yeah, that's what
brand.
I buy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Because if you look on the back, you'll see the bacteria listed. Whereas if you just buy, Kroger cottage cheese, it's not listed.
It's so good. One little serving has like 19 grams of protein.
Yeah, it's a superfood. It's got lots of protein and it's pretty filling. So it's a nice way to. How do you eat your cottage cheese?
I just eat it plain.
Just nothing. Yeah,
Nothing. Just like
no
straight.
topping. I love it plain as well, but I think it tastes really good with that monk fruit. Little bit of monk fruit. It's so good.
Is it like a flavored monk fruit? Is it like
Yeah,
vanilla?
it's like
Or
caramel macchiato.
oh, caramel macchiato,
It's
vanilla,
so good.
monk fruit. Wow, that does sound good. So the sweet and the tangy, it
Yeah, it's
gels.
so good. I
Oh,
mean, like I said, cottage cheese in general is like either you love it or you hate it. But if you love cottage cheese, you will love that. Did you ever like cottage cheese with pineapple? Like I used to, when I was in med school and college, I used to live on that stuff, but it can be a little bit high in sugar. So you want to you can add your own pineapple or you can add any other fruit to it. It's just, it's become like a really nice staple for me to get a little more protein in because I think it's hard when you're trying to get protein in and you're not eating red meat. So it's a nice way to add it.
I don't only eat red meat.
I know I'm not trying to make you like, but you do. I have to say, you kind of took a stand on it, and
Yeah.
so it whether you like it or not, it's kind of your stand.
Well, it's because there's a
Own it.
lot of BS in the online wellness
Yeah.
world, and I think that uh, the most pervasive tends to come from the sort of the plant-based community. I'm not
Yeah.
saying I'm not indicting everybody who's plant-based in that, but it's just that the cleverness and the way that they like to demonize and fearmonger animal products, I think
Yeah.
needs to stop.
Yeah.
It needs to stop. My mother was vegetarian for many years, and her health was terrible.
Oh yeah.
And the misinformation, about like eating eggs is going to clog your arteries and all this stuff. It's just like I'm waiting for somebody within the plant-based community to rise up and be like, guys, we have to chill. Like,
Yeah,
it's one thing to be an ethical vegan.
you're
It's
right.
another thing to spew health misinformation and fearmonger and make people super paranoid about.
Well, unfortunately, I came from like being South Asian is really interesting because there are so many vegetarians and they're all dying of heart disease and diabetes. And so I already knew that there's something wrong with the way that they're eating. And it's not because they're vegetarian, but because they're vegetarian, they don't have a lot of protein options. And you're filling yourself up with a ton of carbohydrate foods. But still, even then, most people who are immigrants to the US, they develop their disease when they get here, which is shocking that you could eat this hugely carbohydrate centric diet and still not have diabetes and heart disease. But then you move to the US and I guess it's like Coke and Pepsi, and you could think of all the things it may be,
Yeah.
but something changes and then you develop all these diseases. So it's more than it has definitely more to do with diet quality than being any kind of, you know, vegan or non-vegan. I also think that, ethical vegan is a whole different world. I think that I love animals and I get it. Like some people are just like, I don't want to eat animals and I get it, but that's a whole different conversation then
Yeah.
than health.
Right. And I think that's the best reason that I don't like meat, that I don't, it makes me very uncomfortable to eat the flesh of another living
Right.
being. That's an amazing reason to not eat meat.
Right.
Also, the religious reason. You were saying
Right.
that you're of Indian ancestry.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
cows are holy.
Yeah. And I was even more so grew up in a Jain household, which is kind of like Buddhist, but it's like a offshoot of Hinduism. They believe in killing no living beings. That means you're not even supposed to eat onions and potatoes
Wow.
because you're killing the plant, and you're not supposed to kill insects. You shouldn't step on, you shouldn't kill any kind of human. It's like a non-violent.
Wow.
So that's
Sweet.
another. It's a beautiful ideology, but really impractical. I mean, in real life, where do you draw the line of like not harming another being because they consider plants, insects, and everything kind of a living being. So there's a whole other discussion, but when it comes to health, I think that you can see that there's many different diets that can be really healthy, and there's no like you can't say that there's one that's
Right.
elite.
I agree with that.
Like Mediterranean diet's probably the closest thing
Right.
to the elite
Yeah.
diets.
It's just that I mean, a plant-based, a diet that excludes all animal products I mean, that's a pretty extreme diet.
It is an extreme diet for most cultures around the world. It's pretty extreme if you think about it, because they would need to. There's only a few places in the world that would be able to survive without that. But there's also like this whole world of like diet trends that I can't stand. I mean, like lectin, like oh, remove lectins. How do you feel about that?
Non-issue.
Yeah.
I eat tomatoes and
I mean, it's like the Mediterranean diet, we don't know exactly which part of it is the healthiest, but we can pretty much presume it's the spices, it's the tomatoes, and it's just the high amount of vegetables, many of them being lectins.
olive oil.
Yeah.
Yeah, extra virgin olive oil.
Yeah. Olive oil is like, I think, I think olive oil has won the battle of the oils. I can pretty much say that I feel confident saying that olive oil is the go-to oil. Yes, you could put avocado oil, kind of similar category,
Yeah.
but there's some special properties of olive oil.
What is your stance, since we went there, on grain and seed oils? As a
I'm not a fan.
Are you not a fan? Because I mean, the medical and nutritional orthodoxy still loves them. I mean, they promote them. They do.
I mean,
They
they promote them in the sense that they're not speaking out against them, but I don't think there's a lot of people who are saying,
I think that some will argue that there's no and I don't consume them. I
yeah,
avoid them, but I think that some would argue, just to play devil's advocate, even to my own biases, that there's no solid outcome data suggesting harm from consuming them.
I think grain is a refined oil has so many negative things. There's especially oils that you keep using over and over,
Right.
like at these restaurants where they're deep frying and you're just oxidizing that fat, and it's so bad for you. I mean, I think sugar is probably my top thing that probably wrecks most people's diets, but refined oils, number 2, like the grain and seed oils.
I agree. And I think that what the advocates for these oils, the apologists for these oils, the mistake that they make often is that they look at studies utilizing quote unquote fresh oil.
Right,
But the form that these oils take in most people's diets today are not fresh.
right.
And by the way, fresh is a misnomer because these oils are so heavily processed, even
Totally.
when you buy them
Yeah,
in a sealed plastic container.
right.
Why are they stored in plastic, by the way? That's
It's
another thing,
so bad.
because it's like the manufacturers know that they're garbage. But here's the deal, that people don't consume them fresh. They consume them after they've been sitting in fryers for days or been used to create innumerable ultra processed foods.
And you almost can't find products that are cooked at restaurants or at the store that are not cooked in those oils.
Yeah. Feed somebody, do a clinical trial where you feed somebody oil from a fryer.
Yeah.
I bet you'll see an inflammatory effect.
But I mean, 100%, that would be a 100% study, but it's really hard to do nutritional studies. I think you've talked about this before, except for that study that I was telling you where you like hospitalize patients and all you can eat is like what you get. You really can't know the nuances, the differences between the diet styles and the confounding factors that might come with it. So, like you said, with meat, that's the problem is that a lot of these studies, the meat eaters were also doing other things that were unhealthy. So it's hard to differentiate which one was which.
Yeah.
And so until we have a way, and I don't know if there is a way really to figure out how to control, unless you put people in literally like hospital like settings and feed them only what they get. And that sounds like a torturous, you'd have to pay someone a lot of money to do that research.
Yeah. I mean, I just think that animal product meat, I mean, even we could even go so far as to say lean
Yeah,
beef is a
yeah.
very nutrient dense food.
Yeah, and I think you could argue that the way I see it is that I don't do it from cultural reasons, and just I don't think that's the first thing I would have if I started like fermented dairy. Yeah, like I could see myself having more of that, but I think that there's many different diets that you can have plant forward, as long as they're all kind of vegetable and unrefined forward, that can be healthy. Like we know that there's no one microbiome that it's healthy. There's not one. Me and you can have completely different microbiomes, but they can both be super healthy and longevity promoting. So that to me makes me feel better because I'm like, well, there is no one good diet. So you should just kind of concentrate on things that you can do, like exercise, sunlight, intermittent fasting, having unrefined, low sugar, high nutrient foods is like the goal,
Do you
right?
do you take supplements?
I only take vitamin D and I take omega 3,
Hmm.
and that's it. And I'm not telling anybody what to take for them, but those are the two. I will take ashwagandha from time to time. It's a nice Ayurvedic stress reducer, uh, and amla berry is too, and melatonin once in a while for sleep. But that's pretty much it.
Vitamin B12.
No, because I do a little bit of dairy.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. What about you?
Supplements?
Yeah.
I actually took
Everyone's gonna go run and buy these supplements, so I'll start like spewing them off.
well, I took ashwagandha actually today.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know that much about it.
Why'd you take it?
Well, because I'm interested in like the stress relieving
Yeah.
effects.
There's huge so when I first started on my wellness journey, I used ashwagandha to help me kind of de-stress. I knew a little bit about it because there's really good studies backing the stress relieving properties. And I know in Ayurveda they use it all the time. And so somebody asked me like, "Hey, do you want to make a supplement?" And I was like, "No, but I think I would if I did it, I would make an organic ashwagandha." And so I did that. And I remember that then I didn't realize what a bad rap supplement industry has, and I just felt like, "Okay, I'm done with I don't wanna make any more." But the ashwagandha thing was so useful because it helps kind of once you're doing all the right things, like I had started to change my diet, I had started to change my lifestyle, but there was still kind of that lag time for me to feel better, and that was really helpful, in that way, and it's pretty well studied. Rhodiola and ashwagandha are well studied in the way that they can help you reduce stress, but I don't think it's an everyday thing. I think it's a thing you take when you're stressed out and then you stop.
Yeah, I think it's cool to it's good to have something like that
Do you
in the
take any other supplements?
yeah. I take a good high quality fish oil.
Yeah.
I take astaxanthin,
Mhm.
which is a carotenoid found
Mhm.
in shrimp, algae, wild salmon. Where's your fish oil from? I forgot to ask.
It's,
I mean, or is it not? It's not.
it's algae
It's
oil.
algae oil, your
Mhm.
omega 3 supplement. Got it. Cool. I take fish oil, astaxanthin. I take magnesium. I'm now taking magnesium and riboflavin, high doses of each, because I discovered that I get migraines
Oh.
occasionally. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, and they're both. There's a good
yeah.
amount of evidence on both of
And
those.
magnesium is it's pretty well tolerated and there's not like
Yeah,
a lot. My biggest issue is that people will take like blanket supplements and then they don't know that like vitamin A, D, E, and K are fat soluble. So you can overdose on those. And they have data that shows that you can do real harm by taking high doses. And so you just don't want to take blind supplements. People shouldn't just say, oh, I heard this, I heard that. Like, when these shows were on or they'd read in the magazine, they
yeah,
just start adding more and you don't really know what's happening, but it actually having an impact and interacting, and there are negative things that can happen from it. So I'm a huge fan of vitamin D. I think everyone should get their vitamin D level checked. They should optimize it. That goes without saying for your immune system, for your mood, for your gut health, for I mean, you name it, and vitamin D plays a role. But beyond that, it's really growing that good gut bacteria. Gut bacteria like makes vitamins. They can make like a Akkermansia makes like a B3, which is nicotinamide, and actually protects your neurons from degenerative diseases. It can actually reverse in mouse models ALS.
wow.
And so if you're eating a really good diet, which it's also difficult to do, but you can really influence the vitamin levels and how much you can extract from your food as well.
And so, what is? I mean, broad strokes, but a diet that encourages an optimal gut microbiome. Fermented foods we talked about.
Yeah, fermented foods number one. Fiber is number two, and then reduce your intake of alcohol, excess alcohol, refined fats, and sugar.
Hmm.
So alcohol, sugar, and fats are things that like literally, besides antibiotics, kill the gut microbiome. And it's tough because alcohol is such a I mean, at very small doses, it can be really, really helpful. And then at the doses that most people consume it can be really harmful to your gut bacteria. And a lot of people who have had dysbiosis or having GI issues or having mood issues, they should experiment with cutting down their alcohol and seeing if that helps.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of alcohol. I mean, I drink like on occasion, but
Yeah, I'm not either, actually. I feel like always I never really like how it feels, and then the next day my sleep is disturbed and I don't feel like myself. And that's my problem with a lot of these uh, things. Like alcohol makes you feel out of control, and I don't like same thing with all these herbs, a lot of these things that people do. Like when you feel like you need to take something to escape your own problems in your life,
mm.
it's a signal, especially if you're using it often, that there's a problem there.
Yeah, and alcohol, I mean, it numbs you, whereas something like ashwagandha,
Yeah.
it doesn't numb you.
No.
It just helps your body better cope.
Right. But the problem with ashwagandha, I will say, is that it's really hard to get lab tested ashwagandha in America because a lot of it comes from India or South Asia where they have a ton of heavy metal in the ground. So you want to just make sure that yours is tested for heavy metals.
Ooh, wow. I'm
Yeah.
gonna show you the bottle
Yeah. I
downstairs
mean,
and
it depends on some companies will release like so what I I still do a very small batch of organic ashwagandha that I make basically for myself in small batches. And you have in America, you kind of have to have it lab tested, but I noticed on Amazon most places don't.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah, any spice actually. If you're buying like turmeric, like one spoon of turmeric is equal to exercise, 30 minutes of exercise.
Wait, what?
Yeah. So 1 teaspoon
In
of
what
turmeric,
sense?
endothelial function, which is the most important sense,
Okay.
because it's your heart, it's your blood vessels. So in Japan, they did a study where they looked at the impact of 1 teaspoon of turmeric for 8 weeks, or 30 to 60 minutes of exercise a day for 8 weeks, or nothing, neither. The neither one, didn't have great endothelial function. The exercise one had improved endothelial function. The turmeric had almost equal.
Wow.
So not to say you shouldn't exercise, but we're talking about exercise all the time.
Yeah.
And then we never talk about eating like spices. It's so weird, right?
Why is endothelial function important?
So our blood vessel wall is so when you're looking at heart attacks, high blood pressure, with high blood pressure, you think about a you want your blood vessels to be soft and flexible and can, when you're running, you need a lot of blood, so it can be stretched. And when you're resting, you can go back to your small size. And when you're eating a ton of oxidized fats, you'll have little plaques there that harden the blood vessel wall. And so it won't be able to be as flexible. And then it could burst, it could damage, it could block. So endothelial function is really at the basis of life and death, heart disease, high blood pressure. When you have a lot of sugar running around in your blood, you get these plaques as well. So that's why people with diabetes have much higher risk of heart disease. So endothelial function is extremely important in stroke, heart health, and blood pressure. So you really want to. That's why exercise is so great because it kind of exercises those blood vessels, and as we get older, they get a little stiffer, and our diet really impacts it. So this is an easy way. I mean, they just did this proof of concept study, but like think about the implications of that.
Wow. So, and you mentioned oxidized oils. So it's the grain and seed oils
Yeah, I mean,
can impair endothelial
y-
function.
yeah, if you think about cholesterol plaques that happen, it's literally eating bad fats. Okay, and
Wow.
that's why fat, has been flip-flopping is because of that, is because when you look at cholesterol plaques, you're like, "Oh, it's the fat." But then we didn't know at that point whether what kind of fat was bad, but now we know, "Oh, well, if you're eating walnuts all day, you're not gonna have to worry about cholesterol plaques, but if you're eating, French fries, that's when the plaque develops."
A lot of people are afraid of PUFAs, right?
Yeah,
But I mean, I think this is the important distinction that needs to be made.
yeah,
Walnuts are rich in PUFAs,
right,
but they're also rich in antioxidants that protect those PUFAs, right?
right,
The PUFAs that are found in grain and seed oils, it's not even the grain and seed oils, it's what is done to those grain and seed oils
right.
that initiates this process or accelerates this process called oxidation, which you're saying,
Yeah, causes inflammation and um, plaque formation. So things, really easy things that people can be doing. I mean, lifestyle things that I think I've incorporated on a daily basis is that intermittent fasting with a circadian pattern to it, and trying to go fiber protein first at all meals, trying to limit the timing of my meals, getting tons of sunlight and movement during the day. And I feel like those are like very easy switches that I wasn't doing before. I went to med school, but no one had told me any of those things. As I mean, we talk about exercise in general, healthy diet, but nobody really said like what you're supposed to be doing on a daily basis. And really, we lived an opposite life of that for so many years that it was so crazy to me to think that, wow, it's nobody's talking about that. No wonder people are lost.
yeah. I mean, and in med school, how many you got what, an afternoon of nutrition training?
Well, I know it's like so little. It's laughable, and at when I went to Beth Israel Deaconess, which is one of the Harvard hospitals, that was the first year that they didn't allow drug lunches, like drug companies bringing lunch. Um, and that was like a big revelation because the drug companies, it was like so sad. The drug companies would bring you like a carb, fat laden lunch and then talk to you about how their
Yeah.
medication was it was like so sad. But then my year was the first year they actually the Harvard hospital subsidized the food for the medical residents, and but it was still like really unhealthy, refined carb full foods because I think one, the knowledge wasn't there yet. And I think now it's changing. There's a ton more nutrition. But medicine is delayed, right? So what we're talking about right now is going to happen 10 to 20 years from now. It takes about 20 years from a concept to be accepted into the mainstream medical world.
Yeah. But also, like, there's enough on your plate as a doctor. Like,
Yeah.
people shouldn't really go to their doctors to learn about nutrition.
No. Well, they can, and there's tons of people now that are very well informed and there's lifestyle medicine. There's all these people. But I think having the lifestyle that we led for so many years, it was disregarding circadian rhythms, disregarding I was like, when I was at the pinnacle in my career of what you would, from somebody in my world would call like pinnacle of success, is when I felt the shittiest. Like I was exhausted. I was anxious. I was feeling unsatisfied with my life. So it just tells you how much of diet and lifestyle plays into, you know, all of this because that was not success to me, like being the a partnered doctor in a practice like
What?
that.
Yeah. What is the pinnacle of success? The quote unquote pinnacle of success for a doctor? Is it just having a ton of repeat customers?
The pinnacle of success, it's different for everyone, right? You could be in academia and your pinnacle of success is research dollars or like being associate professor, or like that's a whole different world, right? But if you're out in the community, that's why everyone feels so burned out because the pinnacle of success used to be you're a partner in your practice in a rural place where everyone knows your name and you have like some kind of purpose and passion for what you do. But the reality of the situation, insurance companies and the way medicine is now with medical legal issues, it's taken a lot of that away. And so there's like record levels of dissatisfaction. But the problem is people are getting older and the population is aging and there's going to be a huge need for doctors. And so we're going to have to change something because nobody's going to stay in the profession. Like someone like me who went into the profession wanting to do nutrition and medicine and now I can't find a way to do it in the traditional sense. Like that's sad, right? That's driving people out of medicine. Every day there's somebody I hear of that left medicine and that's sad because we need doctors.
Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.
If you produce too much, this can spill over into allergy and into autoimmune disease. But most interesting, it looks as if many of the most serious chronic illnesses begin as inflammatory processes.